Hi everyone, I'm Nikki and welcome back to the Fundamentals of Print Design. In this lesson, I'm going to show you some tricks involving lines and shapes in your projects. Now, lines and shapes, this is what I like to call that supplemental visual element that we use in our design. It's not as important as the images and text that we've talked about previously, but they work great to emphasize certain content or create just that little bit of visual interest that you may be looking to separate your design. So what do I mean when I say lines and shapes? Well, in InDesign, this is going to be those visual elements that you create using your shape tools over here, your line tool, your rectangle, and then your other shapes in between. And then how you use those in your design to emphasize your content. For example, we used a circle here, more like a button, a visual button that says register now. And then behind that, we have a blue rectangle. And then down here, we mimic that and have the same kind of button throughout and another blue rectangle. So once you decide what shapes you want to use, it's important to use those throughout to kind of flow that style from front page to back page. And your choices for shapes are quite vast, and you can have a lot of fun with this, but I suggest that you don't overdo it. And to show you here real quick, because we don't have a lot of lines and shapes in our document, but I still want you to see how to use them for future projects. When you want to create a line, you just highlight your line over here, and then what I did was hold Shift, hold it straight down, and that creates a straight line from top to bottom. If I didn't hold Shift, see if I let go, then I can drag this line all over the place, and then it's not a straight line, so to speak. It goes from that center point that I clicked and drug out, but it's not going to be a straight line. So I typically try to hold Shift first to make sure that I have a straight line. The next step after I have my line is to go over here to stroke. And you have a few options when applying a stroke to any line. You can determine the width. You can have something very thick down to something very fine. And you can also decide how your strokes are going to join together. And you can pick the type. This is what I have the most fun with, is the type of stroke. You can always use a solid stroke, but you can look in here and realize that you have some options to make your stroke a little bit more interesting based on your project. You can have a dashed line. I'm sure you've seen that a lot. Some dotted lines, a wavy line, and another closer dotted line. Now, one thing to keep in mind, again, is just not to overdo this. This is like with any sort of effects that you use. Less is more when it comes to this. You don't want to have strokes on everything. For example, you could put a stroke around your image. And I do this sometimes. See, you can add like a pop of color to that. But realize that to stick with your design, if you start having fun with this, you immediately start changing the look and feel of your design from more modern to more organic. See? So you can definitely have fun with strokes and lines on your document, but it's important not to overdo it. Use it wisely. I tend to use my lines here for emphasizing content or separating content. You can, once you have your straight line, for example, you could put that on a 90-degree rotation to make it horizontal, and you can put a line there perhaps, and then I would move this behind our button. So you can create a little bit more visual fun happenings with lines and strokes if you want to, but I would just leave it at that. I wouldn't go overboard with that. Another option is to kind of use multiples. I'm just duplicating this by holding Shift and Alt, and you can have two different styles together, and then you can place that in your document accordingly. Maybe you want to use it to separate content here. Just to create, see how it kind of creates like a visual pop there when you want to use a stroke. But again, it works, the design works fine without it. So that's something to keep in mind when you're using these shapes and lines to add some visual pop. Does your design look good with it or without it? And if it's better without it, then you don't necessarily need to use them. But it is a way to add some other things to your document. It's a way to have important elements pop off of your background. You can see here, if I removed this and just put register now right there, you've lost the visual hierarchy, the pop, the look here for an action word that button helps. So it helps the design. It doesn't take away from the design, but it helps that. Another little trick that I'm going to show you with images, let me find an image, this one, we can use this one, is a corner option to take your images from square. And this is a little, it's almost like a hidden gem in InDesign, but you don't always have to stick with just hard-edged objects. You can soften them. So if you select any object, it could be an image, it could be a shape, but any object, you can go to Object, and then you can go to Corner Options. If you don't see it, you would click to see more. And you have options here to fancy up your corners. So you can have a fancy one. See what it does there? I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to cancel and zoom into this corner so you can see the full effect. Corner options. So you can have a fancy corner, and you can change the size of this to have a bigger effect or smaller effect. See how that took a big chunk out of that? You can have a beveled edge. You could have an inset, an inverse rounded, and my personal favorite, because it's just simple and clean, is rounded. And if you hit OK, you can see what happens there is that it just takes that square image and rounds the corners slightly. And you can decide how much of that you want in your corner options. You can take this really, really slight for a rounded corner. See, that's just barely rounded. Or you can really make a huge rounded corner. Okay. Now, one thing I would say, when you have an image on the corner like this, the lighter, the less of a round, it looks better, because I would like that to be trimmed away with the bleed. So if it's too much, see how it comes in there? So pay attention to that, because now you might end up not having your image go all the way to the bleed if you have too much of a rounded corner. But that is one way to have a different look to your images. It makes it softer, not as hard and crisp. If we did that to her, for example, see another effect of this. By default, I tend to go to a 0.3, and we can't really see that because this is in the way. But see, it just creates a nice, just a nice rounded, softer feeling. So know that you have options for your shapes to take them out of their normal kind of solid, firm, and crisp line. You can soften that with that corner options. You can do that with any image and any object here as well. So that is a look at lines and shapes. Again, use them minimally and make sure that when you do use them, they're making the right statement that you want for your document. They're not subtracting from it. They're not taking away from your other important elements like your images and text. That comes first. So these lines and shapes come in really handy just to add that little extra detail, little extra pop to make your project stand out. In the next lesson, we're going to talk all about effects, everything from transparency to drop shadows, how to use them correctly, and maybe not even using them at all in your project. Thanks so much for watching.